Welcome, everyone, to this deep dive, and we're going to be talking about the Nanjing Massacre.
Yeah,
This is such a huge topic, we can't just jump right in.
absolutely.
And before we get to the actual events, we need to kind of lay the groundwork. So
Right.
we're going back in time a little bit here
We are
to the early 20th century to kind of understand the
staged,
stage. Yeah, what allowed all this to happen in the first place.
the factors that led up to it.
Right.
Yeah.
And our sources for this are a variety of historical accounts, analysis,
Like a
different viewpoints.
primary and secondary sources.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's just dive in.
Okay.
One of the key players here is Japan.
Of course.
And we need to kind of look at their ambitions at the time
Yeah.
in Asia and really kind of their quest for power and resources.
Japan's rise as a regional power.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think a good place to start with that is the first Sino-Japanese War back in 1895.
It is. Yeah, that's a turning point.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about defeating China.
Right.
It was about establishing themselves as the major force in Asia.
So what happened after that war?
Well, for one, they gained control of Taiwan.
Right.
And that kind of further fueled their appetite for expansion.
So it's not just the territorial gains, but a shift in mindset, too.
Absolutely. Yeah, and also how they view China as well.
Right.
So it had a profound impact on their military and their perception of China.
Okay, so they start to really see themselves as this dominant force.
Yeah, a sense of entitlement that they could kind of dictate terms to their neighbors.
Right. And how is China taking all this?
Well, unfortunately, China was in a very vulnerable position.
Okay.
Imagine a nation in deep turmoil, struggling to even hold itself together.
This is like the warlord era, right? When
Yeah.
you had different factions vying for power after the fall of the Qing dynasty.
Exactly. Warlords controlling different regions.
Okay.
And the ruling Kuomintang party was deeply divided.
So China's really fractured at this point.
Yeah, it was like a house divided against itself, unable to present a united front.
So you've got Japan, this rising power,
Right.
with this growing sense of its own destiny. And then you've got China that's
Fragmented.
fragmented, and weakened
Yeah.
by all this internal conflict.
It's a dangerous combination.
It really is, yeah.
For sure. But there's another layer to the story
Okay.
that often gets overlooked.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Despite all this political and military tension, right,
Uh-huh.
Japan and China also had strong economic ties.
Really?
They had trade relationships.
So they're rivals, but also trading partners.
It does seem kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
But international relations are rarely black and white.
Right.
Even nations with conflicting interests can be bound by economic necessity.
So how significant were these trade ties?
They were definitely significant, particularly for Japan,
Okay.
who relied on China for certain resources.
Okay, so these ties were seen as maybe a potential bridge
You're
between
correct.
the two countries.
Some at the time saw them as a potential stabilizing force.
Okay.
But as we know, the forces pulling them apart would ultimately prove stronger.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if things could have been different.
Right.
If those economic ties could have actually, fostered some greater cooperation.
It's one of those what-ifs that historians love to ponder.
Yeah, for sure.
But to fully grasp the complexities, I think we need to go back to that first Sino-Japanese war.
Okay, back to 1895.
Yeah, understanding the psychological impact of that war
Okay.
on both Japan and China is key.
So how did that war really shape the minds of both the victors and the vanquished?
We need to look at how Japan's victory fueled a sense of superiority, almost arrogance,
Okay.
and how China grappled with humiliation and this deep fear of vulnerability.
I mean, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Two very different reactions.
Right. To the same event, both with long-lasting consequences.
So we've kind of laid the groundwork here.
I think so.
We've seen Japan's rise, China's turmoil, and these, kind of interesting trade ties.
Complicated.
Yeah, that bound them together even as they were kind of drifting towards this conflict.
Yeah, this is just the beginning.
Right.
To unravel this historical puzzle.
Yeah.
But by carefully examining each piece, we can start to make sense of the bigger picture.
Okay, and for our listener, this is about understanding the roots of the conflict.
Or the historical context that often gets lost.
Exactly.
Because history isn't just about dates and battles. It's
it's-
about the choices people made, the ideologies they embraced.
And the forces that shape their destinies.
Exactly. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off with that first Sino-Japanese war. And remember, we were talking about the psychological impact of that event.
Right. Yeah, the kind of invisible scars left on both nations.
Yeah. And it seemed like that war created a sense of Japanese superiority.
Right.
And a corresponding Chinese vulnerability.
Yeah, exactly.
In Japan, the victory fueled a wave of nationalism and militarism. It wasn't just about celebrating their military prowess, but about cementing their belief in their right to dominate the region.
So this sense of superiority wasn't just a fleeting feeling. It became deeply ingrained in their national psyche.
Precisely. And it shaped their foreign policy,
Yeah.
their military strategy, and even their cultural outlook.
So they really started to see themselves as the rightful leaders of Asia.
The natural leaders of Asia, yeah.
Okay.
The rightful heirs to a Pan-Asian empire.
Wow. That's a pretty heady mix: nationalism, militarism, imperial ambition.
Is.
And all of this directed at a China that's already struggling
Yeah.
with its own internal demons.
It's a recipe for disaster, isn't it? And unfortunately, the situation in China only worsened in the years following the war.
Okay.
Warlordism continued to plague the country, weakening its ability to resist Japanese encroachment.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
China's weakness kind of emboldened Japan,
Mm-hmm.
and Japan's aggression further destabilized China.
That's a good way to put it. And this dynamic played out not just on a political and military level, but also in the economic realm.
Oh, right. Those trade ties we were talking about.
Yeah, I remember those.
Right. The seemingly contradictory links between these two rivals.
Well, those ties became increasingly strained
Okay.
as Japan sought to exploit China's resources and markets.
So the trade relationship, instead of being a bridge, became another source of tension.
Exactly. Japan began to view China not just as a trading partner, but as a source of raw materials.
Right.
And a captive market for their manufactured goods.
That's interesting because one of the sources I was looking at argued that Japan's economic reliance on China actually made conflict counterproductive.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that with Japan's increasingly aggressive actions?
That's a great question, and it highlights the complexity of the situation.
Yeah.
While it's true that Japan benefited economically from trade with China,
Right.
they also felt increasingly constrained by their dependence on Chinese resources.
So it's not just about economic gain, but about control,
Precisely.
about securing those resources for themselves.
They wanted to guarantee their access to those resources, even if it meant resorting to military force.
So it seems like we're seeing a pattern here.
Yeah.
In every aspect of their relationship, political, military, economic, Japan sought to assert its dominance over China.
That's a keen observation.
Okay.
And as we move closer to the events of the Nanjing Massacre,
Right.
it's essential to understand how this dynamic played out in the years leading up to 1937.
Okay, so we're shifting our focus now to the 1930s,
Right.
the decade that witnessed the rise of Japanese militarism
Right.
and the steady erosion of any semblance of peaceful coexistence.
Yes. This is where we see a series of critical decisions,
Okay.
miscalculations, and escalating tensions that ultimately paved the way for the Nanjing Massacre.
It's almost like watching a slow-motion train wreck, knowing the tragedy that's about to unfold,
Right.
but feeling powerless to stop it.
That's a powerful image. And it captures the sense of inevitability that many historians have noted when studying this period. But even amidst this escalating tension, there were moments when it seemed like a different path might be possible.
Really? So there were genuine attempts at diplomacy or efforts to de-escalate the situation?
There were, though they often proved futile.
Okay.
We'll explore those paths not taken as we delve deeper into the political maneuvering and diplomatic failures that characterize this period.
So we're going to look at the missed opportunities.
Right.
The moments when history could have taken a different turn.
Exactly. And I think those moments are crucial for understanding how seemingly small choices, individual decisions, and historical contingencies can have such devastating consequences.
It's a sobering reminder that the path to war is rarely a straight line.
It's often a winding road paved with misperceptions, miscalculations, and missed opportunities.
And those missteps are particularly heartbreaking when we consider the horrific human cost that was ultimately paid.
Right.
And speaking of that human cost,
Yeah.
I think it's time we start connecting these larger historical forces
Right.
to the individuals whose lives were forever altered by this conflict.
You're right. In our next part, we'll shift our focus from the macro to the micro.
Okay.
From the grand sweep of history to the personal stories of those who lived through this turbulent era.
Because ultimately it's through those individual stories that we can truly grasp the profound impact of these historical events.
Exactly. And while those stories will be difficult to hear,
Yeah.
they are essential for understanding the full scope of the tragedy that unfolded in Nanjing.
Okay, so we've spent the last couple parts looking at kind of the big picture.
Right.
The historical forces that set the stage for the Nanjing Massacre.
Right.
You know, Japan's quest for power, China's struggles, and the complicated relationship between the two.
Yeah, we've seen how those events, like that first Sino-Japanese war,
Right.
really cast a long shadow.
Yeah, it's like we've been piecing together a puzzle, right?
Yes.
Connecting the dots to reveal a larger pattern.
And that pattern, unfortunately, is one of escalating tensions,
Right.
missed opportunities, and a steady march toward conflict.
So where do we go from here? How do we bridge the gap between these larger historical forces and the human cost of this conflict?
I think it's time we shift our focus from the macro to the micro.
Okay.
Instead of looking at nations and armies, we need to start thinking about individuals, the people whose lives were caught in the crossfire of these historical events.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the grand sweep of history.
It is.
But ultimately, it's the individual stories that make these events real.
Exactly. And while those stories will be difficult to hear, they are essential for understanding the full scope of the tragedy.
So how do we approach this? I mean, where do we begin to tell these stories?
Well, one way is to look at the diaries and letters written by people who lived through this period.
Oh, yeah.
Those first-hand accounts offer a glimpse into the fear, the chaos, the resilience of ordinary people.
Yeah, those personal narratives, I think, provide a powerful counterpoint.
They do.
To the official histories.
Right.
The accounts of battles and political maneuvering.
Exactly. They allow us to connect with the human dimension of this conflict.
Right. To see the war through the eyes of those who experienced it.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about people.
It is.
Their hopes, their dreams, their struggles.
Suffering.
Yeah. And as we continue to explore the Nanjing Massacre.
Right.
We have to keep that human element in mind.
Absolutely.
So for our listener, this is a call to action. As you learn about this historical event, seek out those personal stories, those voices from the past.
Right, because ultimately it's through empathy and understanding that we can learn from the past and work to prevent such atrocities from happening again.
Powerful message.
Yeah.
We've explored the historical context, the complex interplay of factors that led to the Nanjing Massacre. And we're about to, confront the human cost of this conflict.
We are. And I want to encourage our listener to approach this topic with sensitivity.
Yeah.
With a willingness to listen and learn from the voices of those who endured this horrific event.
It won't be easy.
No.
But it's a journey worth taking.
It is.
If we truly want to understand the depths of human cruelty and the enduring power of the human spirit.
And on that note, we'll leave you to reflect on what we've covered so far. Stay tuned for the next part of our deep dive, where we will delve into the heart of the Nanjing Massacre itself.